All right, we're all set. um, Thank you so much for taking some time, Karla, to meet with me and talk with me. Um, your work has been really influential in my life personally. I go to school at Naropa, and one of our professors, I'm not sure if you are close with her or not.
Diane.
Diane, exactly. Little shout out for Diane. One of the most incredible people I've ever come in contact with. And during our family diversity class, we were presented with some of your language of emotions cards. And, I, of course, bought some and was looking through those over the past year, and just giving language and understanding to some emotions that I had either never recognized the emotions before or never understood what they were trying to say to me was so powerful and so helpful in my life. I was actually working my way off of medication for anxiety, and um, I want to get into this a little bit with you, especially with your new book, Embracing Anxiety. Um, um, just the emotions underneath all of that starts to come up, and having your work kind of support that was really influential in my life. So thank you so much for that, and thank you for the time to talk today.
Thank you.
Yeah. Your work with emotion is extensive. It's it's there's a lot of content here.
Yeah.
I've spent a good amount of time reading through your website and reading through some of your books, and obviously having your cards and some of your workbooks in my life. And finding a place to start is kind of difficult because, where do we want to go with it? Do we want to kind of go in a direction of your work with dynamic emotional integration? Do we want to stay with empathy or anxiety? Like, there's so much here to go for. And I was kind of thinking the best place that I actually would like to start, if you're open to it, is kind of just getting a sense of how you got into this work and what led you to being interested in working with emotion. I think I have a somewhat of an understanding of your background, but as much as you feel like sharing, I'd love to hear what brought you to this place.
Well, sure. It's a sad story. It's a sad story. It's not sort of like I'd like to study emotions. That would
Mm.
be interesting. um, I survived a lot of pretty severe early childhood trauma for a number of years,
Mhm.
and like many childhood trauma survivors, victims, I was a victim at the time. I survived later, but
Mm.
they learn to turn up their empathy very, very high. And empathy is your capacity to read emotion and social information off of other people and off of animals and um, off of social structures. So,
Mhm.
in order to stay safe, a lot of little trauma victims will learn to read the hell out of their environment,
Right.
right? See who's safe, who isn't, what's going to happen today, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
I also learned at that time to dissociate.
Mm.
So it was a very intense time. And what was happening to me was very intense, and my emotions responded in a very intense way, which they should have.
Mhm.
But what it meant was that I was hyper focused on others,
Mm.
incredibly emotionally activated,
Mhm.
and I didn't really have any kind of grounding.
Mm.
So my early life, it was like a sharknado.
Mm.
It was like a
Mhm.
constant tornado. And so for me, learning about emotions and empathy there wasn't an option. Either I would learn about them or I would go down in flames
Mm. Mhm.
because there was so much going on. And so learning about emotions one by one, what I started to do was I would look at people and animals that were angry. And
Mm.
I'd be like, so that's dad, that's mom, that's the
Oh,
cat,
interesting.
that's the
Uh-huh.
horse, that's my molester who lived across the street. Like when all those beings are angry, what does it mean? What are they trying to do? What
Fascinating.
what are they doing with this anger? So I started looking sort of sociologically at anger rather than I feel anger and therefore,
Mhm.
or that person's angry and therefore. It's like I looked at everybody, and I did this with all the emotions,
Mhm.
and then began to understand what the emotions were trying to help a person do.
Mhm.
Anger, if I'm going to talk about that, is about boundaries. So whenever anger's there, there's a boundary that's been crossed that the person's trying to reestablish.
Mhm.
How a person reestablishes their boundaries is the key, right?
Mhm.
And their own
Right.
skills determine how anger is going to be worked with. But a lot of people don't know that, and they just see an angry person being a complete jerk or even violent. And they're
Mm-hmm.
like, anger's terrible. You never
Mm,
want
right.
anger. Anger's the worst thing in the world. So people are misattributing a badly managed emotion for the emotion itself.
Right, exactly. And you see
Yeah.
that time and time again playing
Yeah.
out in people's lives every single day, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of times I'll see people working with anger and I'll be like, "Give me that anger." You
Mm.
get some you're just ruining it for everyone. I'll show you anger.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's like some hidden gem there that they're
Yeah.
not, utilizing that you notice has a lot of potential for growth.
Yeah, like I'm
Yeah.
filled with grief
Mm.
about how people deal with their
Mhm.
anger.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating. Do you have a sense that these emotions that we feel are something that we give meaning to subjectively, or do you think that emotions have a more objective message for us to read into ourselves or to understand what's going on or what they're trying to say?
There's two answers to that.
Okay.
Is yes and.
Okay.
The neuroscientist of emotion, Lisa Feldman Barrett, she's a psychology professor, but also studies neuroscience. She's talking about how emotions are constructed,
Mm-hmm.
that they're constructed out of what's going on within us, whether we are activated or calm, whether we are tired or awake, or it's like different, or whether the thing that's happening is unpleasant or pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
And so she says that we construct emotions out of that, and I agree with that to a certain extent. But I also think that these emotions have their own level of intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of times people will be dealing with an emotion that doesn't make any sense to them. It's like everything's going fine.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I feeling this intense grief?
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out the grief was holding a part of the person's life that they just
Right.
skated over at the time,
Mm-hmm.
but it still required grief. So a lot of times I see the emotions holding more intelligence than anybody gives them credit for.
Mm-hmm.
So that when a person is feeling an emotion, I don't say, well, just try to feel happy. Do you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? It's like, just try to
Right.
slap some happiness on top of that. But
Yeah.
instead, go into the emotion, say, okay, it's grief. What has died?
Right.
When you ask that question, then the person can this really deep level of awareness that doesn't exist out in the world of words
Right.
and logical steps.
Right. Yeah. And I've heard you say once that, if you're trying to invite happiness into a party where anger is present, happiness is saying, if it were to be personified, is like, why am I here? Why are you bringing me to this party?
I was resting.
I was resting.
I have nothing to
Yeah.
do here right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That concept I think is really fascinating, and something that I see a shift happening for us culturally, but also something that we really struggle with is not bringing empathy to emotion and having such resistance to certain ones, and also wanting to hyper work other ones. We love joy. We always want to be joyful and happy. We don't want to experience shame and grief and anger or all those
Yeah.
sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if your work has been defined or informed at all by the understanding of equanimity. Because when I read your definitions of empathy, I feel in myself a lot of resonance with the ideas of equanimity.
Well, tell me about, I mean, I know the word
Mm-hmm.
and the definition, but how are you using it?
Sure, sure. So here's a quote from Pema Chodron. Says, to cultivate equanimity, we practice catching ourselves when we feel attraction to aversion before it hardens into grasping or negativity.
Hmm. There's a kind of a there's a concept in there, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a concept in there that there needs to be a steady state,
Right.
and that moving down into the depths of emotion
Mm-hmm.
might be a problem in that, and moving up into the heights of emotion might be a problem.
Right. Yeah.
And for me, I would say I have a steady state which welcomes those.
Right. I see.
So it's a bigger steady state. So maybe
I
I'm
see.
equanimity that just has really, really large,
Mm-hmm.
like, um, that has room for all of it.
Right. Yeah. And
If
you've said that before. I wanted to quote you here as well. This is a really beautiful piece from your book, Embracing Anxiety. You say,
anxiety.
various philosophers and researchers define empathy as the capacity to feel for and with other people. But I see empathy as larger and more complex than that. I see empathy not simply as a human to human emotional behavior, but also as a capacity to feel and engage deeply with anything and everything. And that's the quote really that I was like, that is to me the understanding of that equanimity of allowing what's here to be here, accepting what's here to be here, and investigating and nurturing those experiences. Am
Yeah.
I understanding that right?
Well, I also think, for instance, I always had really excellent empathy with plumbing. I didn't study plumbing,
Hmm.
but when you live in a house,
Mm-hmm.
there's plumbing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would go, and I would open the back of the toilet and I would be like, this piece here, is this how you want to be moving at this point? Like,
Mm-hmm. Right.
is this where you want to be traveling within your within your area, right? And so understanding the what's broken and what's working in something is a way for me to have empathy with it. And my brother's a mathematician and he has massive empathy with numbers and
Mm-hmm.
mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
And watching him do math is like watching someone else dance
Mm-hmm.
or that sort of thing. So it's your capacity to engage
I see.
with.
Okay.
So it's a very, um, I would say very, very alive, very engaged. I don't have the word, but you're
Mm-hmm.
just really,
Almost
uh,
embodying.
yeah, you're present with the
Yeah.
thing
Mm-hmm.
completely. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be a person.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be a person.
Yeah.
Uh, a lot of my friends who are autistic, and I use that term because that's what they like,
Mm-hmm.
um, and they have tremendous, like wild levels of empathy with train schedules
Mm.
or aikido or
Hmm. Right.
or or colors or words or that sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that it isn't focused on humans in the way that neurologically typical people do. Then my friends who are autistic are pushed out of the world of empathy. They're exiled,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, nah, you don't understand empathy if you're exiling these people, because these are hyper empathic people
Right.
who maybe are having too much input from humans.
Mm-hmm.
Humans, if you look at them, they're a mess. They're
Mm-hmm.
just a mess.
Yeah. Right.
They're a mess. Like, emotions are just steaming off of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're a very, very sensitive person, then humans might just be too much,
Mm-hmm.
right? Most
Right.
of my autistic friends are like massively good with animals.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Fascinating. The concept of feeling and engaging with something and relating to and wanting to understand the ins and outs of what a person is, what an animal is, what an emotion is. Where do you feel like that comes from, that ability to have and hold empathy for something? Is it a muscle? Is it something that we're innately born with that we maybe lose? I'm just curious, like what informs that ability to be able to carry that?
yeah, I think it's innate. I think it's
Yeah.
like the innate intelligence of a little human being. And sadly, it can be turned off in school.
Mm,
It can be turned off very easily in
mm,
regular schooling,
mm,
um, because schooling is so, um, well, grades are just terrible.
mm.
Schedules are not good. Subjects are terrible. That's not how the human brain works. So a lot of what we do to people in school um, turns off their empathy and turns off that that natural scientist and that natural mathematician, that natural artist, that natural dancer.
Right.
It Most of it gets turned off in regular schooling, which is very
Mm.
sad.
Yeah, yeah, that is. And I'm grateful. I also have been seeing that you're actually working on another book right now for children.
Yes.
So I'm really excited for that because I hope that informs, children's ability to maintain that empathic innate ability.
Yeah, and it's so, people are like, how do we talk to our kids about emotions? But they haven't had our terrible emotion training,
Hmm.
right? So kids get it right away.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
really like that. That's
Yeah.
give a kid an emotion and they'll all of a sudden be the emotion expert of your house. I'm like,
Hmm.
good.
Yeah, there's such an ability to deepen into something because there's not all these structures that have been built to block or barricade things away as much as I feel like we learn to do that throughout life.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, I'm curious about this subject in particular because I'm studying wilderness therapy, and I a lot of curiosity comes up for me when I read and look through your work is about this exactly. Where does this come from? Where do emotions come from in us? Is this something that, because we look at the natural world and squirrels or deer, and there's hints of compassion and love in mammalian creatures, not so much with the reptilian species, but is the depth and the language and the translation of emotion deepened with us because of our brain, or is it an evolutionary um, component to our existence? It's just something that fascinates me to think about where this is born in us.
Yeah, I would say emotions and empathy are definitely many animal traits.
Mm-hmm.
And Sir Franz de Waal, who wrote The Age of Empathy,
Mm-hmm.
he works with bonobos and what he calls chimpanzees,
Mm-hmm.
and he finds empathy in in primates. Uh, in some primates are not that good with empathy.
Mm-hmm.
I think capuchins are not as good
Mm-hmm.
as bonobos, and I think he works with orangutans too, and he finds plenty of empathy and love, fighting, everything that you see in humans.
Mm-hmm.
He finds it in
In the
primate.
species.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah. And I that's what I really appreciate what you were saying earlier with your family. Like, okay, here's I forget what you use for anger, but there's dad, embodied in this animal form, because you can see in the natural world these like hints of the emotions we're feeling, and kind of, it's nice because we don't necessarily have to go straight into feeling it for ourselves. We can kind of project that at first, get a sense of what it is, and then maybe recognize the parallels or the transference that we feel with that object or with that animal.
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking of dogs. Dogs have
Yeah.
such, love and anger and fear and suspicion and envy and jealousy,
Hmm.
and
Yeah. Right.
and
We see it
horses
all.
too. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
they do the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, horses are really fascinating in that regard. They carry a great deal of emotion.
Yeah.
Um, and I really like what you have done with dynamic emotional integration by this categorizing of emotions. Kind of there's the fear, and then there's anger, and then there's sadness and happiness, if I'm getting the four correct.
Yeah.
And in that, I'm curious what led you to put certain emotions underneath these umbrellas, specifically with the fear. I noticed, or I think it was actually anger, that there is shame and grief underneath the anger umbrella. And so I'm
No, grief
curious.
isn't the sadness one.
Grief is in sadness. Okay.
In anger is shame, hatred, and apathy.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Well, this started as a joke because a lot of times, the way that I talk about emotions is unusual. The emotions don't think so, but
Mm-hmm.
other people
Mm-hmm.
do. And so people will send me terrible, terrible articles about emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just like shame is the worst emotion in the world. You should never have it. I'm like, what is
Mm.
this nonsense, right? Someone sent me an article that said there are only 4 human emotions. And I was like, oh, what now? Right. And it came from research on facial expression of emotion.
Mm.
And what these researchers found is that there's only 4 emotions that can be identified across all human cultures.
Mm.
The problem is that facial expression of emotion is a very, very poor signaler.
Mm.
Um, and it's really not a good way to identify emotions at all. It's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that they only found 4 human emotions, they didn't start thinking maybe facial expression of emotion isn't where we should be looking, right?
Mm-hmm.
They decided that's what it was. I went, oh, that's just horse, whatever. Um, so I thought anger, fear, sadness. Hold on a minute.
Mm.
And I ran over to the language of emotions, which I wrote in 2010, and I
Mm-hmm.
opened it up and I had the emotions separated.
Oh,
into the
right.
angers, the fears, the sadnesses, and the happiness. I went, oh my goodness, I
Ooh,
hadn't seen it.
onto something.
I hadn't seen it. So
Yeah.
we thought this would be a really great way to present emotions to people who are
Hmm.
overwhelmed,
Hmm.
because anybody can figure out if they feel angry, afraid, happy, or sad,
Right.
right? Then once they understand which family they're in, then they can go into the different emotions that are in that family. So it's really like a category of emotions,
Right.
and then anger, fear, happiness, and sadness are the kind of the overarching
I see.
emotional, but it was from a joke.
Yeah,
So it's me fixing facial expression of
I like
emotion.
it. I
Terrible
like it.
research. Yeah.
Well done. I
We're
really,
doing shadow work here.
right? Just the next layer under. I love it. Um, yeah, and I actually really value the way that you've done that, because for me, I've struggled with anxiety for a long time, and while working with a therapist, she has often said, okay, so what are you feeling underneath your anxiety? Or she'll ask me questions. Okay, so how did it feel when your partner got upset with you for not doing the dishes? um, and I'm like, well, it makes me feel anxious, or it makes me feel what, you name it. It's whatever I'm saying is not an emotion, though. I'm saying an experience that I'm having. And she always has wanted to help me deepen into understanding what I'm actually feeling and what emotion is alive there, so that I can understand what I need to do to meet myself, bring compassion, and connect with the reality of what's going on with me. And the breakdown there of those categories has actually given me understanding of what emotions are, because I feel like before last year I couldn't actually explain to you what shame feels like, or what the emotion of grief is.
Yeah.
um, and so I'm curious if that's something that you see regularly in your life too, is people struggling to actually even identify what they're feeling.
Yeah, and for some people, they have what I call a go-to emotion, right?
Mm,
So they would go to anger. So
mm,
whatever would happen, they would be angry first, or
mm-hmm.
they would be sad first, or they would be anxious first.
Right.
And that emotion would sort of rush out in front of the other ones because the person feels comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
But any of those emotions, happiness too, can be a cover for the emotions the person doesn't quite have skills with yet,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and yes, I know that people have a very hard time understanding which emotions they're feeling, especially in regard to anxiety, which is almost always mistaken with panic.
Mm,
And these are very important emotions, but they do very different things.
mm-hmm.
And panic is about when your life is threatened, and anxiety is about when you need to get a number of things done
Right.
and you need to hit your deadline and finish your task. So it
Mm-hmm.
has a lot of energy, but panic has a massive amount of energy to help you survive, threats to your
Right.
physical life.
Right.
So when we talk about anxiety attack, anxiety disorder,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about panic, but people don't even know the difference between the
Right.
two. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember listening to you talk about, there's two types of people who have anxiety or work with anxiety, and there's the procrastinators, and then there's the not procrastinators. I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit more about what you mean there.
I wrote about this in Embracing Anxiety, but I
Mm-hmm.
got it from a book by Mary Lemia called What Motivates Getting Things Done. And she brought forward that idea that procrastination is a valid way to deal with anxiety. And anxiety helps you get things done,
Mm-hmm.
helps you hit your deadlines, finish your tasks, gather everything you need to arrive in the future prepared.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that anxiety can be difficult to deal with is that you don't live in the future,
Mm,
right?
right.
Your anxiety does, but you in your physical body live in the present moment. So what if your anxiety's way out in a month
Mm-hmm.
and you're just trying to settle yourself today?
Mm-hmm.
So anxiety can be very activating, and it can be somewhat disorienting because of
Right.
its future focus,
Mm-hmm.
but it has a purpose. There's two ways to do this. I am a task oriented person, and a task oriented person goes from thing to thing to thing to thing on their way to the deadline or their way to the task. They're
Mm-hmm.
constantly doing tasks. So their anxiety would be at a very low ebb constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So they would wake up and their first thing was, what do I need to get done? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that would be their whole focus through the whole day. And it looks better. Task oriented people are the ones that we put up
praise.
on a pedestal.
Right. Yeah.
Um, Procrastinators, on the other hand, work toward a deadline.
Mm.
And so they don't task in the physical world.
Mm-hmm.
They're tasking maybe in their unconscious or subconscious. The
Mm.
deadline's out here, and they come up to the edge of the deadline. A big bunch of anxiety comes up, and they, boom, get it done.
Mm.
Now, nobody treats procrastination as a valid way to get things done. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're a procrastinator, you will be shamed,
Mm-hmm.
and you will be taught to be the other kind, to be a task person. But procrastination is just as genius as task. We
Mm-hmm.
just don't see it. It's like being left-handed.
Mm-hmm.
I was
Right.
looking for a new mouse, and I use my Mises ambidextrously.
Mm-hmm.
There's no left-handed mouse anywhere that I could find. And
Really?
I went to 3 stores. I went, okay, this is an online thing,
Right.
right? So if you're a procrastinator, you won't find what you need
Mm-hmm.
in any store.
Yeah.
But after I finished the book, my friend Chris wrote this on Facebook. He said, I just looked up the etiology of the word procrastinate, and it's from Latin, belonging to tomorrow or deferred until the morning.
Hmm.
So a procrastinator actually knows where things belong.
Hmm.
Procrastinator knows where anxiety belongs. Whereas a task person, and I am one, and I call myself out, like I'll go into a room and it's dirty, and now I'm cleaning that room.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? It's like I have
Right.
stuff to do in this room,
Mm-hmm.
but now I'm cleaning that room, and I have to continually pull myself back and
Right.
go, stop tasking.
Yeah.
Like, and I'll get a lot of stuff done, and then I'll be like, shoot, I forgot.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
I'm working so constantly that I never rest, and my
Yeah.
procrastinating friends can chill. Like
Mm-hmm.
here they know about, here's the deadline, here's them, chill, 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 chill,
Still getting it
boom,
done.
right, and they get it done. And so we've been taught to see procrastinators as lazy
Mm-hmm.
and then lucky.
Yeah.
Like we
And what,
can't even
yeah.
see them.
And what the problem there is that I feel like a lot of the anxiety they take on is actually just projections from other people and not actually
Yeah.
something they embody themselves. It's not even
No,
there. Right.
they don't need to do the task thing. Like
Right.
writing a list, like
Mm-hmm.
for me, lists are food. Okay.
Yeah.
I need a list, right? And I can need to cross on my list. And procrastinators are like, what? You're just wasting your time. You're wasting your whole
Right.
life.
Right.
They would need like a mind map,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
I look at mind maps and I'm like, no, get that the hell away from me. I
Right.
hate
Yeah.
that. No. But
Yeah.
as I was writing Embracing Anxiety, I tried to procrastinate. I thought, I'm going to try this.
Yeah.
And I suck at it. But I just wrote another book, and I'm like, I'm going to try to procrastinate again. And on the
Mm-hmm.
week that the book was ready, I had 2 chapters that were unfinished
Mm-hmm.
and one that wasn't written. And this was Monday, and the book was due on Thursday. Right? I
Mm.
mean, that's some serious procrastination.
You're pushing it.
And I was like, all this anxiety, which I'm not used to having. And I was
Yeah.
like, just do it. Learn how to procrastinate. And what I found was, like on Tuesday, I went in. The way that I write chapters is I'll put a bunch of stuff there. Like I want to talk about this, and then I'll get there and I'll write it.
Mm-hmm.
And I put all this stuff in these later chapters, and I came to the chapter, and instead of that cat that goes, screw this, screw that. You've seen this meme, the cat meme,
Right.
get
Yeah.
this off,
Swiping
get this
things
off.
everywhere.
Right. I was like this cat. I was like, right. It's like, no. And I became so like brutal toward things that were unimportant. And as a task person, I didn't have that capacity. So I'm like, procrastinators are freaking awesome. I've become
Yeah.
better at this.
Yeah.
But I could
Yeah.
just go in and I'm like, no, that's totally unimportant for this book. Get serious.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was great.
And is this something you feel like we can utilize and learn different skills, or is this something that you feel like, okay, you as Karla need to stay task oriented
Yeah,
for yourself?
I will always be task oriented.
Right. Okay.
But at least I open my psyche up.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have a procrastinator in my house, and learning about this made our marriage so much better,
Mm-hmm.
because now I just let him be him and
Right.
do what he does.
I'm sure he
But
loves
I
it
can
too.
watch him. I watch him. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try to procrastinate. I'm gonna be like Tino. And
That's
so
awesome.
it's amazing. It's like I walked on the wild side.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, this is why I know so many people enjoy your work so much, is because you're able to flip things that have been deemed negative or counterintuitive, or
Or
you name it,
lazy.
or
Yeah.
lazy, and flip that to actually be to see the genius, which was a word you use a lot, or the brilliance underneath these things. And
Yeah.
you name a negative emotion, and it is very agreed upon that these are bad. And I love something that you say quite a bit, is that the 7 deadly sins are 5 emotions. One is about food, and the other is sex. So there's just in this, there's a bias towards emotions, enough so much that the Catholic Church deems 5 of them to be a deadly sin. And um, yeah, I very much appreciate the ability to flip the script here and see the genius underneath that.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it happens everywhere. I mean, we love us some Dalai Lama, but
Right.
whoever's running his Twitter, every couple of weeks they'll come out and just kick the holy bejesus out of emotion, of
Mm,
usually anger,
mm,
but and then anxiety. But
mm-hmm.
just like anger's the worst thing in the world, and I was like, I need to show you how anger gets used. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
Dalai Lama, let's talk. Let's talk.
Let's set that up. I would love to hear that
Yeah, let's set
conversation.
that up. Hey, Dalai Lama, how you
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Carla here. Got some thoughts for you.
But I'm one of the things that's really, really disturbing me right now. I mean, besides everything that's disturbing everybody right now, is that
Mhm,
by by treating normal human emotions as character flaws or
mhm,
as things that we must um, get rid of, right? Exile completely. What happens is that when those emotions come up, as they should, because they're normal human emotions,
mhm,
people lose their capacity to function. And if people don't have control over their own emotions,
mhm,
someone else is going to control them for them.
mm.
And here we see
Yep.
white supremacy, we see, the kind of massive loss of people on the left to conspiracy theories, people on the right to conspiracy theories, and they've basically stopped being citizens of, functional citizens of a democracy.
Right.
They have become pawns in someone
Mhm.
else's game,
Yeah.
and it's because they don't have connection to or understanding of their own emotions.
Right. Yeah. And I'm so grateful you're bringing this into the conversation, because I was actually curious, about what might happen if, and I guess this would be one side effect, would be kind of not necessarily being a part of a cohesive culture anymore. But
Yeah,
what is a byproduct of not being in touch with emotion, or having your emotions so drained that your ability to hold it and have the awareness of it in a relationship to it, um, what do you see that leading to for us, for our where we're at right now contextually in America?
yeah. Well, emotions are the language that you use in relationship. And so if you don't have access to all of your emotions, you basically don't speak the language of relationship. You don't speak the
Mm,
language of love or of conflict mediation or of speaking across differences and chasms. And we see
mm-hmm.
that everywhere.
Right.
Um, on most of my friends are on the left, and the kind of hatred that I'm seeing on the left, the kind of dehumanization of the right,
Mm-hmm.
it's there's no difference,
Mm,
right? It's like it's not better that we're seeing dehumanization and hatred on the left, and all kinds of, really cruel, dehumanizing pictures of politicians and
mm,
people welcoming the hatred of others.
mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
don't see, like, that's been one of the big bummers for me of this time, is that people on the left who are supposedly the cool ones are just acting like fools like
Mm,
anybody else. And
mm,
I do understand the stresses people are under,
mm-hmm.
but what I see is if you don't know about your hatred,
Mm-hmm.
you are going to be you're going to be weaponized by
Mm.
someone, right?
Right. So
If
is
you don't,
there's vulnerability there when you're not
it's
aware?
tremendous
Mm,
vulnerability.
mm-hmm.
If you don't understand your emotions, if you can't manage your emotions, someone's going to manage them for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're lucky, that won't happen. But right
Mm.
now, we're not lucky. There's,
Yeah.
like Facebook and Twitter and all of the social media
Mm-hmm.
inputs, where we're finding that Facebook's doing psychological tests on us without our permission,
Yeah.
that, you know, we're
That.
being served ads that are not true. We're being
Mm,
served all kinds of stories that are not true.
mm,
And I understand on the right, there's a thing called fake news, right? Now,
mm-hmm.
they're not being protected because the news that they're getting is also fake. It's like it's all a giant house of mirrors.
Right.
But I can understand
That's a
that
great analogy. Yeah.
fake news.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? It's like
Right.
it's all, don't trust anybody.
Yep.
But if you don't trust anybody, then you are at the mercy of um,
Mm,
you're at the mercy
right.
of
What
people
you
who
let
can,
in. Right.
yeah, jack into your hatred and your panic and your depression and all that kind of stuff.
Hijack that and then control that almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how propaganda works. It
Mm-hmm.
works on your emotions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I guess this is, I was finding myself curious. I was like, why did Karla pick anxiety? Like, why was that the emotion and the experience that she chose to write about and embracing anxiety? And I'm actually like, thinking about it right now, getting chills because it's the perfect emotion to have written about for where we are, because it seems as if we've lost connection and an embracing of anxiety, which has led to us being so vulnerable and taken advantage of by people who can hijack what it's like for us when we're spinning out of control in the chaos of unaware, unfelt, unembraced anxiety. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I've been noticing so much messaging. Don't be afraid. Don't be anxious. Don't panic about the pandemic.
Mm-hmm,
Like,
mm-hmm.
first of all, you need to be all three. You just need to know how to work those emotions, right?
Mm-hmm,
Because you need to be afraid. That's your awareness of the present moment and
mm-hmm.
your instincts and your intuition. You need that when you're
Yep.
going out shopping,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
You need your anxiety to make sure you've got everything in your car. How many, do you need gloves? Do you have gloves? Do you have a mask?
Mm-hmm.
Where's your hand sanitization? You need anxiety to be on it. And panic, which is about if your life is threatened, our lives are threatened.
Yeah.
Our lives are threatened. And it's
Mm-hmm.
fascinating to me that people are like refusing to wear masks as a
Mm-hmm.
way to say, I know I have control.
Mm-hmm.
And I
It's like,
wonder what that
yeah.
does to their anxiety, panic, and fear, because anxiety, panic, and fear aren't that ignorant. They
Mm-hmm.
know.
They know.
So if
Yeah.
the person's doing that, it's like, I'm not as scared. Um, I wonder what happens. Can they sleep?
Mm,
Or are they having to drink to get to sleep or something like that? It's like
sure.
their emotions are probably like, what are you doing
Still,
to me?
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like willingly crawling into a tiger cage,
Yeah.
rather
I'm
than
not
taking.
scared.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm not scared of this tiger. Okay, well, your heart rate is at 180 beats per minute, so I'm not sure
You
if
might be
I
scared.
believe you're probably scared. Um, and that's the thing, is like we are in a room with a tiger, if you in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, and this is a time where, when we're looking around to see if there are threats, that we are actually faced with a lot of threats.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, for you and the work you're doing, what kind of advice are you trying to support people with in this time to actually embrace these, quote unquote, negative feelings,
Yeah.
of fear, of anxiety, of, you name it, that might be happening because of the legitimacy of panic that's happening.
Yeah. I did a video on panic, fear, and anxiety, talking to people about the difference between them and how to work with them,
Okay.
because they've all got to be present, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things for anxiety right now, I mean, it's getting, depending on what state you're in and how they're managing pandemic, but um, like for a number of months, we couldn't think 3 weeks out.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And anxiety, I mean, I could think a year or two ahead of time before this. Do,
Mm-hmm.
do you know what I'm saying? I could
Right.
I could schedule out 2 years, and I'm like, can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And just bring your anxiety closer. Bring bring your timeline closer to
Mm-hmm.
what you can manage. And that, I think, is one of the most helpful things, is to help anxiety set a boundary for your anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
saying, nope, let's look at 2 weeks,
Okay.
right? Let's guess about a month,
Mm-hmm.
but don't plan, just
Mm-hmm.
guess.
Yeah.
So bringing it in closer
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that you have everything you need, and uh, And I'm just really sorry for people who are in unsafe places where there aren't masks, um, where there aren't rules about masks.
Mm-hmm.
So that even going to the store for them would be kind of a terrifying situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's like, plan to leave this state. That
Mm-hmm.
would be one.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Mm-hmm.
put that on a list. Plan to leave this state that doesn't have mask rules. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then I also did another short video about sadness, depression, and grief,
Mm-hmm.
because all three of those emotions are necessary too right now, because
Mm-hmm.
there's death happening.
Yeah.
And depression is an emotion that comes to tell you that things aren't going well, that
Mm-hmm.
things aren't, this isn't how things should be. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people are feeling depressed and sort of blaming themselves
Mm-hmm.
instead of taking that and looking out and saying, okay, this is a problem, this is a problem, and then sort of um, get it organized.
Yeah.
Almost like it's like anxiety is like, I'll write a list
Mm-hmm.
about what's so wrong right now.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm seeing is people are feeling a lot of fatigue and overwhelm
Yeah.
simply because they're feeling normal human emotions about a very difficult time.
Right.
And instead of saying, how do I work with my emotions? There's a lot of this explosive, um, screw you, I won't wear a mask.
Yeah.
Um, screw your social distancing. And they're trying to use anger and rage and hatred to give themselves a sense of strength again. But I
Yeah.
promise you, that's not how
It's not
that
gonna work.
works.
Right.
But then there's also people who are just sort of kind of falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm seeing a lot of like an existential dread.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the word anxiety comes from, is angst, is
Mm-hmm.
that existential sense of, of futility.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing a lot of that too. So it's just really hard to watch. I mean, it's never
Yeah.
easy to watch humans who don't know how to work with their emotions. But when things happen like
Mm-hmm.
this over a long period of time, and just to watch the just the human destruction that's going on,
Yeah.
be simply because people don't know what their emotions are or how to work with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really painful. Yeah.
It is, and it's just kind of mind blowing to me how truly disconnected we are from understanding the basic language of an emotion.
Yeah.
Um, and your work's really supportive for people getting to that point of kind of gaining an ability to understand, okay, this is what my sadness is asking of me, or this is what my suicidal yearning is asking of me, or whatever might be
Hmm.
coming up for you emotionally. And I'm curious if you notice that there might be at times a limit to embracing these emotions, or if there are limitations to how much you should be allowing, because it hurts sometimes.
Yeah.
Grief is such a painful, or guilt is such a painful thing to feel.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm curious if you feel that it's just kind of a thing of you need to allow it to hit, to be real with it, and what it does to you is what it's going to do to you, or do you feel like there are limitations in a process to actually embodying and stepping in and having empathy for these emotions?
I have a practice for each emotion. So there's some
Perfect.
kind of there's a, depending on the emotion, the practice is different because each
Mm-hmm.
emotion is its own entity, it's its own self.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, grief. Grief requires a grief ritual,
Mm-hmm.
and all cultures have it. And I've created a grief ritual that sort of brings from all different ritual cultures. And we're having an online grief ritual this week, because I feel like we need to know how to grieve. We need to know how to grieve together. And grief is not just itself. There's a lot of emotions in grief. Everything will come. It's an emotion party. Um, but I have something on my website called "How Much Emotion Is Too Much,"
Mm-hmm.
and the answer is pretty simple. If you do the practices for the emotion, and it's not shifting,
Mm-hmm.
get some help.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's that you haven't failed. Something else is going on.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, or you may be in the wrong emotion because
Right.
we don't, like, I've told this story before, but a woman came to me and said, I've been crying every day for 2 weeks and nothing's shifting.
Mm.
You tell me that sadness means that you're letting go of something. And so I'm letting go and I'm letting go and I'm crying every day and nothing's happening. It's really, I said, well, tell me what happened. I mean, what's the situation? And she said, well, I came home and found my husband in bed with another woman. I went, I know the problem.
Mm,
You're
mm.
in the wrong emotion.
Anger.
Well, anger's good.
Yeah.
Grief. It's grief
Grief.
because at that moment, her marriage died.
Mm,
Right? That marriage is dead. That marriage is over. There's nothing that can fix that marriage. And so she was trying to let go of something when the difference between sadness and grief is with sadness, you have a choice. With grief, there's no choice. It's done. It's dead. It's over. That's it.
mm.
So she was using sadness to work with a situation that required a grief ritual.
Huh.
And so as soon as I said it's grief, she went, oh. And then it all just sort of shifted for her.
Yeah. Right. Right.
But the weird thing is, her husband is still alive. She's still alive. No one physically died, but that
Right.
marriage was dead.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the betrayal and all that other stuff. So she had a
Sure.
lot to work with and said, sweet sadness is like, I'll keep coming every day for 2 weeks, but that's not the right emotion.
Mm, right. Yeah.
And
Right.
grief's like, send me in, coach.
Yeah. Right. I understand this one. I'm ready to do what I need
Here
to.
I am.
Here's the language for it. Yeah.
But yeah, she was a white lady, and for most white people don't have grief rituals that they've ever done. That nobody on either side of my family had any kind of a grief ritual.
Grief. What is grief like?
You go to funerals and you eat the
Yeah.
food.
Yeah.
And even at funerals, I mean, we're such a grief impaired culture that people are proud of themselves for not breaking down at a funeral. I promised myself I wouldn't cry. I was like, this is literally the only
Mm,
place you can grieve.
yeah. Yeah.
We
Right.
suck
Yeah.
at grief.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we do. I I can't help but think, these emotions are things that we're not just trying to understand, but you take it even further where you're wanting to kind of not just accept it as where a lot of training that I've experienced comes in play as acceptance, but you want to actually make friends with grief. You actually want to, I think you even talk about talking to the emotions at times as almost if
Yeah.
you're personifying it as a person.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what you've seen shift in your work with people and also for yourself when you take it to that level of embracing rather than just accepting.
Yeah, I think the acceptance is really great because it comes up to the edge of an emotion. And in many practices, it's like you calm yourself, you come up to the edge of emotion, you go to acceptance, and you watch the emotion go by.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
I'm like, dude, why did you let it go by? What I see, emotions are a very specific form of genius.
Mm-hmm.
So each emotion brings gifts and skills and genius that don't come from any place else. Like grief and sadness are not the same thing. You
Mm-hmm.
can't use sadness when grief is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And so working with the emotions, something I say is, let's say you live 100 years and you read 2 books a day for the entire time you're alive.
Mm-hmm.
You have to wait until you're about 3 or 4 until you can read. Um, you won't even be as intelligent as one emotion. Emotions are brilliant, and
Mm-hmm.
they have um, an ancient language that's beneath language, that's older
Mm-hmm.
than language, that's older than humanity.
Right.
And emotions can tell us stuff that we could never learn. And when people can really engage with their emotions, they can evolve 10 or 15 years in an afternoon, especially
Mm-hmm.
with things like hatred
Mm-hmm.
or rage. I mean, hatred's a brilliant evolutionary emotion if you know how to use it. And if you don't, it is pure violence,
Right. Yeah.
right? If you
Mm-hmm.
if you don't have skills around your emotions, you're not only in danger from others, but you're a danger to yourself and others.
Right.
And so I think working with emotions is really the most important thing that anyone could learn to do. And sadly, we don't we don't let people
Yeah. Yeah.
work
Yeah.
with their
And
emotions.
I like that because you're saying as we feel or notice, things in a mindfulness practice or a meditation of what comes up, we just kind of have mostly been teaching people to just see, okay, I notice that I feel sadness or I feel anger. what else arises. And it builds some awareness, or
Yeah.
actually it builds a lot of awareness. It builds a very powerful way of beginning to understand the flavors and the contexts and the textures of these things. But there's another level here that you're really tapping into, where it almost as if embracing it is the nurturing that we need to experience to actually allow those emotions to settle, find a home, and inform how we connect with others, how we relate to ourselves. It's almost the foundation to actually being able to integrate, which I guess is the premise for dynamic emotional integration, is that actually is um, the groundwork of knowing and being able to move inside of an emotion, not just being able to see it, but to be able to understand it and to feel it. And that to me is really vital in practicing mindfulness and meditation, or um, as you're healing or growing from things, is that big piece of embracing, making friends
Yeah.
with, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I call my practices the empathic mindfulness practices or the emotional mindfulness practices,
Mm-hmm.
because it's about not just um, not just being with emotions, but embracing them fully
Mm-hmm.
and embracing the irreplaceable genius that each one of them brings. I mean, they
Yeah.
are so different and they are so. Uh, I mean, I've been doing this work for 45 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I still discover things about emotions that I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm just, you said my work is, I have like too much work, but the emotions are so untapped,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel so fortunate that I don't like the way that I got into this work in childhood,
Mm.
but I'm so fortunate that I did get into it and that the emotions just welcomed me into their realm,
Yeah.
and that I could learn to write and write from emotion,
Mm-hmm.
and to bring that, to have the chance to play in the world of emotions has been just a
Yeah.
blessing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's definitely not too much that you've done.
Oh, it's a lot.
It's just deep in it, and um, I'm personally grateful for the amount that's there, because it and I think what you're saying is very true. Is that it's not even a lifetime can understand
Yeah.
the depth of what emotion has to bring. Um, just a quick, or not really a quick, but one of the last questions I wanted to ask you about before we go is, um, do you feel that if we were able to understand and kind of bring more empathy and awareness and integrating emotions that we're experiencing right now in our current culture, what everything that's happening with Black Lives Matter and with this pandemic that we're experiencing, do you think that it's inevitable to find connection and harmony in a community when emotions are integrated in a healthy way? Or do you think that by nature of just being human, we're going to have polarity at times and not able to connect? I'm just curious if emotions can be a harnessing piece to bring unity amongst people who are seemingly very opposed.
Yes, and um, yes, when people understand their emotions, and especially hatred, if people
Mm-hmm.
know how to do their shadow work, then they are just delightful to be around, even if everybody's being a jerk and you're all
Mm-hmm.
fighting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you know that the fight is not going to go to a place that people can't come back from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that it's really important to have conflict and difficulties and to be angry and to feel every emotion at every level of activation.
Mm-hmm.
But in having said that, to know what you're doing, to be able to say, I'm in panic right now and I may lash out, so I'm going to go over here,
Mm-hmm.
and not to shame myself, not to take myself out of, out of this world, but to say I've got a lot of violence that wants to come out of me right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to go deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if people could do that, we could change the world. If people could just work
Mm-hmm.
with hatred and panic,
Yeah.
then we could change everything. And then if people could learn to grieve, something I'm seeing with white supremacy is that people don't know how to grieve the changes that are happening. They don't know how to grieve the awareness that white supremacy has been centuries of violence that no one ever deserved, and not one of us did,
Mm.
but we all did. And what
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing is people becoming aware. I mean, you can't not be aware of white supremacy right now. You
Mm-hmm.
can't.
Mm-hmm.
But I notice that people can't feel the shame and the grief
Mm.
in their white body.
Yeah.
And so, because they can't feel shame and grief, they're going to panic and hatred,
Mm.
and they are perfect prey. They are perfect
Mm.
open prey
Yeah.
for strongmen, authoritarian, for conspiracy theories, for propaganda,
Mm.
right? Because they are refusing to feel the emotions that need to be felt.
Oh
And
my
that's one of
gosh.
the reasons I'm giving grief rituals. I'm like, America needs a grief ritual.
Mm.
White people need a grief ritual
Mm. Yeah.
because of what we've done. And I didn't do it,
Mm.
right? But my body did,
Mm-hmm.
my white body, my white ancestors were a part of this. I don't know if we were slave owners, but I know that to be a wealthy person in the South, you were a slave owner.
Mm.
And if my people were poor, they probably would have wanted to be wealthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
If my
Mm-hmm.
people in the South were poor, they probably would have wanted to be involved in that.
For sure.
Um, it was how it was.
Yeah.
And, and, feeling it and claiming it in the grief and the horror of white supremacy. I
Mm-hmm.
see that um, not having that capacity is putting so much more unneeded pressure onto Black lives, onto everyone who's not white,
Yeah.
everyone who's not, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, heteronormative,
Right.
everyone who's not this.
Yeah.
And I see for so many people, they don't know how to live it. It shakes.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's shaking for white people right now.
Yeah.
And if they have any emotional skills whatsoever, they're trying like hell to get themselves,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like, let's have a book club because I don't know what I don't know, right?
Right. Right.
But for people who have fewer and fewer skills, then we're seeing this just extreme explosion of white
Mm.
rage and white supremacy again.
Yeah.
Talk about something that needs to die. We
Mm-hmm.
need a grief ritual,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, you are, I mean, you are nailing it on the head right now. Like,
Grief ritual for white
yeah,
people.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, as you're speaking, I have, tears happening and my chest is getting tight because I'm feeling that. The weight of what you're saying is so accurate. And I've been theorizing in myself, what is happening? Like, it's undeniable that
Yeah.
we've oppressed an entire demographic for centuries. Like, why are there people that I am friends with denying this or making light of it or downplaying the severity of what's happening, or even going so far as to say the Black Lives Matter movement is just like the KKK or whatever? It's like there's something there, and I thought it was anger. I've been trying to think, like, what is happening here? And you're so right. It is a grief, a misunderstanding of how we hold grief in white bodies with the awareness of what has happened in the past, and with the privilege that comes of being born in the body that we're born in. And it's being played by, you're saying, very powerful men who are going to hijack that misunderstood emotion and abuse it and cause them to go and carry it on in ways that are not congruent with the emotion there. And that is very, very powerful. So thank you
Yeah.
for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
just, I know that I mean, Black people have been in a grief ritual for centuries,
Yeah.
right? They've been holding the grief. And
Mm-hmm.
now is it moving over into white bodies, and you're seeing white bodies are like, "Ooh,
Yeah.
I don't know what."
What are we doing?
Um, it just, the more that we can hold our emotions, the more that we can go into them, the better able we will be to make a new world, because that's something that's been true for centuries,
Yeah.
is that emotions have been demonized.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
they're sins.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
because they are the powerful center of everything we think, every decision we make, every behavior we have, every vote we cast, and every group we join.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't understand our emotions, we are not living our lives. Somebody else is.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
mean, there you go.
Yeah.
The story of human nature, the
Yeah.
story of
101.
human history,
Right. Yeah, exactly.
right? Nobody who can manage their emotions is going, or understands emotions, is going to vote for um, an autocrat
Mm-hmm.
or a dictator,
Right.
or right. No one's going to do that. But
Yeah.
clearly, there's a lot of people
Yeah.
who don't.
Right.
And I just think it's so sad. Here I am, like, writing these books. Here's another book. Here's another book. Here's another book. I'm trying,
Yeah.
and there's people out there who see the same things that I do, and they think I'm going to make a buck off of this.
Mm.
Screw you! I'm going to
Yeah.
get power off of this.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, this whole project that has been born out of an Europa cohort with, we will get through this, has been, birthed from this desire to support an emotional, uh, helping people find regulation in the time. And it's kind of the same thing, I think, there with like not like just trying to figure out how to be supportive in something and not get attracted to, benefiting in any way from that movement or that pain that's happening.
I know. I
Yeah.
know. It's like, ew, no.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. You're not working well with your what is your ethics emotion? Oh yeah, it's shame. You're
Yeah.
not working well with your shame.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
something I saw yesterday, and I just wanted to. I understand it, but someone was saying, everybody who wants to talk to racists and reason with racists, you can't do it. First of all, you're totally dehumanizing a person by calling
Mm,
them a racist, but
mm,
you can't do it. They're stuck in what they think. I've tried it 100 times. It never works.
yeah.
And and I thought, well, then how did they come out?
Mm,
Where's their off ramp? If you're telling us that we are forbidden to speak to people
yeah.
who have these, awful and life destroying beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's another thing, that if you have emotional capacity, that you can be present with someone whose ideas are currently vile,
Mm-hmm.
and try in whatever way you can to welcome them back to the human race.
That's huge. That
Yeah.
is, yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to hold. And I would love for people to work on that capacity, because that's really what's needed is
Yeah.
so much love. And,
Yeah. We can't have white people saying, you white people we're
mm-hmm.
through with you.
Right.
It's like there's a saying, and I think it's from Black American culture, which is come get your boy,
Mm-hmm.
which is, your
Yeah.
child is ruining this picnic. Come get your
Right.
boy.
uh-huh.
And if we white people can't come get our boys,
Mm-hmm.
then
Yeah.
who's going to get them?
Right.
Right?
Exactly. Right.
Who
I like
We've
that.
got to find a way
Yeah.
to bring, because I see people who are in the throes of autocracy and conspiracy theories as victims.
Mm-hmm.
They've had their emotions used against them,
Yeah.
and their empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And they can do evil things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I don't see them as like fully functional, like feeling great about my life kind of people, right?
Right.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of unfelt
Yeah.
emotion there. Yeah.
And you see it happen a lot on Facebook too, arguments happening and people defriending each other, blocking. And I just want to make a post that's like, please don't delete your racist friends, like, or,
Yeah.
or however you want to, either side or whatever
Yeah.
your feelings are, because we need that tension to find a way to come together, and a way to go get our boy, or,
Yeah.
whatever, however you
Or
want to think about
make
that.
an off ramp.
Right.
Like, do
Mm-hmm.
you have an off ramp? We've all been in ideologies
Right.
or attitudes where there was no off ramp.
Right.
Like we're right.
Mm-hmm.
We've
Mm-hmm.
all done that.
Yeah, totally.
And people develop their ideas in relationships and in communities. And so they just need better relationships and better communities.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Even the worst training, even the worst ideas in the world, you can heal from them.
Mm-hmm.
And to just give up on everybody is a way to give up on humanity itself.
Mm. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Karla, thank you so much for your time and for talking. I just want to mention this new book that I think is coming out next year. I just wanted to
Yeah.
see if you wanted to give any information about it. It's called The Power of Emotions at Work. Is that right?
Yeah.
And when will that be coming out? Do you have an idea of that yet?
Like July 2021.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And
Great.
it's about if you want to see a place where emotions are not welcome,
Mm,
the workplace, and yet they're there.
yeah,
You can't exile emotions. You can try, but emotions are smarter than we
they're
are.
going to be there.
Emotions are like,
Exactly.
yeah, just let them think they did that.
Yeah, that's great. And the children's book you're working on as well, is that kind of around the same time,
I
summer of
don't
next year?
know. I'm
Okay.
having a hard time getting that. I need to get an agent for that one, and
Okay.
I need some help with it because it's different than other
Sure.
books.
Sure. Sure.
And publishing, it's a, publishing is getting harder and harder, so publishers are getting more and more afraid,
Hmm.
with good reason.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so they're like, if it's not it, like what we thought before, we can't do it. I'm like,
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for the work you're doing. It's amazing and it's so supportive. And honestly, I think if we can start taking advantage of some of the information and the wisdom that you've given, we can see a lot of growth come culturally and as a community and harmonizing. And we'll be on the lookout for the new book, The Power of Emotions at Work. And I've been enjoying embracing anxiety myself, and I'm just so grateful again for your time today. So thank you so much for being here.
yeah, and thanks so much for what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll get through this.
We will get through this. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks, Karla.
Thank you.
Yeah.